Hello again. This is Liz Harper, Executive Director with the Colusa County RCD, and I'm here with Sarah Light, my co-host of the Soil Health Connection and Agronomy Farm Advisor with UC Cooperative Extension. Today we are interviewing Sierra Redding about grazing opportunities and challenges on annual crop fields to reduce biomass and to improve soil health. Sierra is the part-time outreach and education coordinator at our RCD, but is also an artist, teacher, shepherd, and continues her work in the textile and fashion industry. In all Sierra does, she takes into consideration the need, use, and impact it has on the land. She is a true gem of a woman, so let's jump into it. Sierra, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So can you first tell us a little about your grazing experience and what drew you to introduce grazing into Cropland?
Yeah, sure. So I started working with sheep when I was in college, and I started working on farms that were producing fiber for clothing, for local production clothing. And that's what really got me interested in rotational grazing practices and kind of like led me into the world of that. I worked for Sally Fox, who's like a natural colored cotton and natural fiber designer, as well as rancher and biologist. And then I continued to work in the Cape Valley at places like Full Belly Farm, where they would introduce their sheep into all of their rotational grazing, into their annual crops as well. And I started just focusing more and more on how, if we were going to be needing more sheep back into the landscape of California, so try to rebuild our fiber production here in California that's been lost after generations, how can we bring animals into the working landscape that is, say, the Sacramento Valley? And so that's just been in my mind a lot recently.
That's awesome. And Sierra, when you have when you have animals in an annual crop field, what does it actually look like? How does it actually function? Can you tell us about the nitty-gritty of the work itself?
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of people see them like off the highways, like in big alfalfa fields and stuff like that. But depending on how many animals you have, it can look different ways. And so if you've got a bunch of animals and you're a really large scale grazer, then you can have all those animals on one plot at a time. But then otherwise, you can put them into what's like called paddocks. So think about turning your field into almost like a checkerboard. And so in that checkerboard, every square turns into a different paddock. And those paddocks are made with electrical fencing wire that's usually powered by a solar panel. And the idea is that you are still doing the work of what Joel Salatin talks about, and also other large scale grazers on more of like rangeland ideas, where they're trying to imitate what herd animals were doing in the past. We're trying to bring a large amount of animals concentrated into a smaller space for a short period of time, and then leave immediately afterwards for the grand to rest. And so that's what kind of those paddocks do. They imitate what a herd would be doing, except in this way, it would be an annual field.
Wow, that's really interesting. And in what kind of fields have you used this process, and what are the results that you've come across in your experience?
One of the classic ways is to be able to mow down cover crops is a great way for it. Because, with cover cropping, as you all know so well, there's so much biomass that can happen. So sheep or any kind of grazer, be it cows or goats or sheep, can be, or even chickens also, if we want to talk about that later, can do a great job at being able to break down all of that biomass so that later the termination can go a lot easier without having to deal with all that greenery. But then also, I think another great way for animals to be in like annual crop rotations is after the crop is over. And so when you're doing that, then that means that you don't have to be worrying about like the like manure timing with plantings and stuff like that. You can just, once the field is done and it needs to lay to rest, the perfect way to do it is graze over it afterwards, and then allow for all of that manure and little till to kind of rest, and then be able to move on with your rotations afterwards. So yeah.
Yeah. And then as a grazer, what kind of fields are you looking for your animals?
Well, I would say that I'm looking for sometimes diversity is a really great way to have like animals in the space. And so that could be in cover crop fields, but also could be in fields that have gone fallow for the year. Especially this year, I'm driving around, I'm looking at potential rice fields that have a lot of like weeds that are coming up. And so that kind of diversity is really great. But then also any kind of like nutritional value that I see in it. Right now, I'm actually just about to start a project in a wheat field that that didn't go. You know, they were relying on the rain from the winter, and that crop has failed. But they do have this like good amount of wheat in the field still. But now that's kind of been left, all this good green weeds are coming up from underneath it too. And so it's really I'm excited to see what kind of like graze we get out of it and how the animals react.
What a cool project. It gives a different perspective on weeds too. So
Yeah.
that. Okay, so say a farmer approaches you and they want to graze their annual crop after harvest. What can they expect from a collaboration with a grazer?
One thing to be like really aware of is that they're not just going to be like just leaving animals there for a while and then they're done. Like it's a one-time go. People are going to be on your property pretty often. If they're going to be doing that checkerboard, like what we're talking about with the paddocks, that means that people could be moving their animals like every day or every couple days. So I would be prepared that you're going to be having people coming in and out on your property. And then they also are going to need access to water. Animals need water just like we do. And that means that they're either trucking it in. And so knowing that could potentially be happening is bringing water to the sites in the field. Or maybe there's like a collaboration that you guys can work out together where there's like a canal that's nearby, or like you have access to the river, or there's ways that to work with folks on that. But also I think like the fun thing that I've noticed is that have fun with it, you know? Like, I think that's been one of the best parts that I've seen in expecting or not expecting, you know, animal or like things to expect and not expect on land is that expect to just go out and hang out with them sometimes, because I think that, you know, you'll be able to learn something new as well as the grazer too, depending on what the landscape's like.
All right, so wrapping it up, since you're on the grazing side of the conversation or electric fence, how do you think farmers and landowners can begin to work with grazers or thinking about grazing their cropland?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the conversation is starting to happen. I know that it's still a kind of like, I'll say it like it's a little scary and it's a little far-fetched for folks, but it's also really exciting. And so the more we keep like talking about it, I think the more that we can start building ideas around it and like ways to work together around it. But in order to do that, we have to just start, right? So when I'm like driving around the county, I'm always looking at like different fields. Like what I was saying with the rice fields, it's like, oh, that's a great one. I wonder if they'd be interested in if I could have animals over there. Like, oh, look at that cool like walnut orchard. Like, well, that'd be really tight, you know? And so I think that I would advise that like farmers think the same way if you're interested in having animals, or if you're starting to be like interested in the idea of having animals on your land. If you see animals out in somewhere, call that landowner, find out who that person is, and be like, oh, like introduce yourself the same way, because I feel like right now it's like definitely the grazers role is doing the cold callings, introducing yourself and talking about these projects. But if you're thinking about it as a farmer and as a landowner, then yeah, do the cold calls too. Like I said, the way that we can get started and the way we can start experimenting is by first just doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Amen to that. Sierra, thank you so much for being on our little internet show. And I look forward to seeing where grazing goes in the Sacramento Valley.
Yes, thanks for having me, everybody. I'm excited to be on.